I welcome you all with love, everyone. We actually start with a prayer. And the prayer is emerging the heart and the mind, okay, and the heavens and the earth. And just like keep that in mind as we do that. L'Shem Yukud Kudusha Brihu Ushinate Bi'ilu Imu Udilu Biaktad Bishem Biyuke Bivavke Biyudash Bishem Ko Israel Kolam. Amen. So just take a moment and integrate the heart and the mind, heavens and the earth. Good. Now, I always tend to like to start my talks with a little bit of dance, which I invite you all to participate in. We'll dance for about 3 minutes. Why is dancing important? Particularly with age, you want movement, you want strength, you want coordination, you want integration of your different muscle systems. And you also want to activate the inner joy. So dancing activates all those levels in a way that gets you kind of ready to do what you want to do. So that's why we dance. Okay. Then we have a little bit of meditation. I've been meditating for 50 years, so we I've been teaching meditation for 50 years, but we're going to just meditate for a little bit. But for those of you who want just a little bit more about it, in 1995, after the end of a 21-day water fast, a mantra came to me, the name of God, that was different than what I had been using for the last 30 years. And that is Yod, Hey, and then Yod on the in breath, Hey on the out breath, Wa up to the third eye, and then Hey on the out breath. Integrating, again, the heavens and earth. And it's the name of God as grace. So it activates grace in your life. Now, that's for people who may want a mantra, and maybe a lot of people already have a mantra. But you repeat the mantra until your mind's quiet, then you're in meditation. Another part of this is just the very traditional and really pretty much all the spiritual paths is the transfer of energy. So focus on my eyes for a few seconds, and then we'll go in meditation for 3 minutes. And then we're about ready. Then we're at the talking level of starting. So let's start with a little dance. second. I just focus on my eyes and let that energy come through. And we go into meditation with the yod. Yod. And now in the meditation. Okay. Yod. Now we're going to come out of meditation. And here we go. So before I talk about nutrients or supplements, I really want to put things in perspective. Okay, what does that mean? The research shows, as I said in my last lecture, that people in relationship, this was done in women, but it applies to men maybe even more so, have 49% less mortality rate. That's highly significant. Okay, so relationship is very, very important. That's intimate relationship, but also lesser so, but also for just social relationships. They're very, very important in your overall health. The other piece that's very important in your overall health is being conscientious. And they track, this is like Dr. Turner, an 80-year study, and they follow people all the way into, at the end of the 80 years, they start with kids who were 5 years old, and the kids that were most conscientious became adults who were most conscientious, and they were the ones that paid the most attention to their health. And they got 5 years more longevity, which is really quite a lot. And then the willpower behind that, and also regular exercise, at least 4 times a week for maybe 20 minutes minimum. And that seemed to make a really difference. And then we add meditation, and the research shows that people who meditate for 20 minutes a day for 5 years have a physiology that's 15 years younger. Like, that's very impressive. And then we find that adequate sleep is very important too. Because if you aren't getting adequate sleep, what is that? 7 hours sleep, and starting before, say before 11 o'clock, some people say 10 o'clock, but getting to bed relatively early seems to be very important, because sleep is a time of rejuvenation. And then, finally, we're talking about nutrition and the best diet. Now, one of the big mistakes that confuses people is that we have different constitutions. It's a constitutional issue. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm just joking. The point is, some of us need more protein, and some need more protein and fat, and some people need more carbohydrate. So the people who we call fast oxidizers, that's just a term that got used in the 1930s, began to be used, is people who need a higher protein fat content in their diet. And their dietary needs are really different. If they don't get enough protein or fat in their diet, they'll be hungry an hour later. People who are what we call slow oxidizers need more carbohydrate. Now, I don't want to overdo this because generally speaking, when we look at the longevity diets, contrary to unfortunately what some people have focused on in the kind of vegan movement, it is more higher protein and fat and lower carbohydrate. Now, I recommend in terms of protein, 10 to 15% protein, and in fat, and I'm talking about plant fat, avocados and so forth, olives. I'm talking about 25 to 45% of the diet, and the carbohydrates around 25-35% in the diet, something like that. And that's a piece. Now, if you're a fast oxidizer, you may need more protein. So there's not one number for everybody. And part of the issue is we have to figure out what that is for us, because we're unique individuals. We're not cows whose diet is grass. Okay, we're more complex. So if we don't acknowledge our own complexity and we'll get someone else to tell us, then we're not going to be, let's say, the best, most refined diet. So part of the work that I'm talking about is we really have to, according to our Constitution, refine what our diet is. Okay, what's our really breakdown? Now, it's also a moving target. Now, how's that a moving target? Well, when you're a kid and you're growing up, you need your 3 meals a day. Well, for me, at the chronological age of 82, I'm eating 1 meal a day. Okay, that's all I need. In the morning, I have a little bit of supplements and cacao and goji berries and things. And I just have one main meal, which is not a lot. It's a salad and some kind of something, entree of some sort. So everybody's a little different. Some people need to eat 3 times a day, no matter what. So really, after 1 o'clock, I'm done eating for the day. That's it. So again, I want to make it clear that we all are unique individuals. So as I talk to you, I want you to keep that in mind. Now, what I also want you to keep in mind is it changes with your age. So when you're pre-puberty, you're going to have a more kapha diet. It's going to put on strength and muscle and weight, okay, because you're growing. Then you're a teenager, and that's more pitta, what we call fiery. The animal's a tiger, a kapha diet is an elephant, okay? And you're going to have something that's going to give more fire because that's what you are. You're a fiery teenager. And then after that, then you move to what we call a stabilizing vata diet. And that is going to have more oil and more kind of enduring things, but it will be more fat and oil in your diet for everyone. So we have diet according to our age and our life cycle, also according to the seasons. That's another part of getting good diet. So all these things are at play, and it's our responsibility to figure out for ourselves. There's the big broad strokes, and then what's key. So once we've kind of gone through that level of figuring it out, then we can kind of get, start talking about supplements. Now, there's lots of ways to think about supplements, okay? So, for example, I do a lot of work with herbs, and I look at herbs as medicinal and as what we call ongoing or longevity herbs. So there are really 4.5 longevity herbs that are associated with people that have lived a long time. Now, there's some Chinese people who have lived 267 years, not a lot. And so I look at all those longevity diets, and they all had reishi, is a really important herb, goji berries, different ginsengs. Those are your top 3 longevity herbs. And then heishu wu is another longevity herb, those top 4, and then some people do gynostemnia. My experience is those top 4 are the ones I tend to use, and those are the herbs that people took and have taken and take for longevity. Okay, these herbs I take actually too, and they're not like pep you up herbs. They're steady building and maintaining type of energies, and they're also spiritual. So when I went to China, I was kind of looking at their whole Taoist thing and the Taoist herbs. It's clear that reishi is a spiritual herb, okay? That's primarily how it's seen. And truly goji berries too, and then also ginseng plays a role in that too. So that's all I want to say about the herbs. These are what I've just given you, the longevity herbs. The medicinal herbs, that's a totally different story, and they're used medicinally. We're not going to get into that. That's course in herbology. It's interesting. Herbs really work. I use herbs a lot, but for our purposes, I'm looking at longevity. So what are our purposes? Well, I'm looking at, you can take a look at supplements in lots of different ways. And the question that I raise, and this is how I look at it, is what's important is to feel vital, awake, and alert all the time. Full of energy all the time. A superconductor of the divine all the time. Okay? That's 1. 2, to be able to go about your life taking care of business. So, I'm dancing, I'm doing this, lifting heavy things, whatever. I'm not having physical limitations. So in terms of what to me a reasonable goal is to have enough muscle mass and strength that you have no actually limitations in your life, and have enough inner energy that you also don't have any limitations. You just can go all day, okay? Which is the way it is for me, and where it is for most people. That's how I gauge, because I see people privately. I gauge, how's this working? How's their energy? How's their every aspect of their life working for them? So those are like important criteria of what we're doing. Do you have enough energy to lead your life fully and with joy? Now, from a spiritual point of view, I'm going to add one more thing, which is important to me, is that I talk about being a superconductor of the divine. Now, what I mean by that is that we have our bloodstream, we have a lymphatic system, and we also have a subtle energetic system. They're called nadis. There's 72,000 nadis. There's a central channel called the Sushumna. Meat, fish, chicken, and dairy clog that flow of that energy. And through those channels, you're dealing with more, what we call more divine energy. Okay, and people talk about it in different levels and different traditions, but it's a more subtle spiritual energy. So the idea is to have a free flow of that energy through your whole system. So that's why in most spiritual traditions, not every single one, but in most, 99% of them, they recommend a vegan diet. No milk, fish, or chicken. There used to be milk, for example, in the Indian diet. Well, that was a time when the atmosphere wasn't polluted and the grass the cows weren't eating wasn't polluted. Okay, there was a time when dairy was there, but at this point, the spiritual diet in the Indian system, the Vedic system, really following what they're saying, is really what a sattvic diet, and there really isn't really dairy in it, although originally there was. You needed the B12 and it also created a certain balance, but today everything's so polluted that functionally speaking, dairy is no longer sattvic, from my point of view. Now, traditionally, you go to an Ayurvedic person, they'll say, yeah, a sattvic diet includes dairy, okay? I understand that, but functionally speaking, it's not, because the dairy is so polluted. So that gives you kind of a little bit of a feeling for it, of how we want to look at it. And so we're talking about our age, and we'll talk, sex plays a little bit of a role. Women do live longer than men, generally speaking. When men and women become vegans, the men add 7.2 years to their life and the women add 4.48 years to their life. Okay, in general, the woman lives 3.6 to 4 years longer than men in general. So there are some obviously variations. So I'm bringing that up as I look at that whole kind of overall picture. Okay, now there are, I'm going to say, different pieces of longevity. I just mentioned to be functional. Now, with age, past 50, people tend to lose muscle mass. Well, you may have heard I do a little bit more physical exercise with the push-ups and sit-ups and different things, and you don't need to lose muscle mass. So you want to do enough exercise to maintain your muscle mass. That's just kind of a basic in that. Another piece to that is the genes. Are we eating and taking nutrition to maintain our gene organization? Now, with age, the genes can tend to get a little disordered. And there are certain things that help with that, but generally we're looking at a supplement input that does that. Now, for example, I work with a special kind of iodine. It's scalar wave activated iodine. It's called Illuminine. That's just the name I gave it. But the point is, what does it do? It organizes the p53 gene, which helps organize your gene sequences so they don't get out of sequence. So they're able to work right. And the gene expression stays more as it has been. It also, the Illuminine organizes the gene repair, because we have a lot of things that disrupt our genes at this point, from radiation to the junk food to many issues going on in our environment. And so it helps repair the genes, reorganize them back to its original alignment. And then one other thing is what we call telomeres. Telomeres are like the tips of the genes. And with age, if we aren't restoring the telomeres, they get shorter and shorter and shorter until we aren't able to organize our DNA anymore, and then you die. Okay, so the key here is eat in a way that keeps the telomeres at their original length. And this illuminating helps do that. So, but there are more. It's not just illuminating. So I'm going to look at how do we protect the telomere length of all our chromosomes in our genes. Turns out that folic acid helps integrate and maintain that, and so does B12. They both help with that. And then B2, B5 also, and then vitamin D3 is a big, actually a big player. And then we have zinc, folate. Good question, folate. Zinc, iron, vitamin C, and vitamin E, and I already mentioned D, and the omega-3s. There's DHA and EPA. Now, in my book, written in 2000, gosh, it's 25 years ago, Depression Free for Life, I talk about DHA and EPA. And I'm just going to make a point, because actually in the last talk was not as clear. The research shows that we need more DHA than EPA, but we need both. And the DHA is important for brain growth, memory, clarity of mind, in specific. Whereas EPA, as I talk about in Depression Free for Life, I'm also a psychiatrist, I also use the EPA for treating manic depressive psychosis, and it really does make a difference, it really helps. But the DHA is a big player. So women, during pregnancy, they're giving their DHA to the baby, which is a reasonable thing to do. Why? Because you need it for brain growth, brain integration, brain function, brain evolution, okay? So often mothers, because I watch this during pregnancy, I'm always checking, and I recommend DHA particularly as a supplement, because often the mothers become DHA depleted. Baby gets a DHA, that's the way it should be for its brain growth, but we have, and the result is postpartum depression. When you're really depleted in DHA, you get postpartum depression. So, I have gotten 100% success in treating postpartum depression with DHA. I'm not going to give dosages because everybody's a little different. I figured that out individually. But it makes sense. You're giving your DHA to your baby, which the baby needs, and now you're depleted. Unless, what I recommend, of course, is to take DHA as a supplement during your pregnancy, so you don't get depleted. That's an obvious thing. Okay, so that being said, DHA, I've had 100% result in the last 50 years of healing postpartum depression within a few weeks. So the long-chain omega-3s are very important. In general, they're very, very important for brain development, brain growth, and also muscle development, which is interesting. EPA and DHA, you really need both. And usually we think they're from fish, which is usually people get it for sure, But as a person who doesn't eat animal products, meat, fish, chicken, and dairy, I had to go looking around and say, where do the fish get the DHEA, EPA? They get it from yellow algae. So there are extracts available. Again, I'm not going to give you brand names, but on my website you can get it, of a mix of EPA, DHA from yellow algae, totally vegan, totally clean, and different than the fish, because the fish are higher on the food chain, and so they have a lot more, I'll put it, toxins in the EPA, DHA, just by the nature of it. So that just gives you an idea of how important it is to pay attention to the details, being conscientious. Okay, now, what is another big issue? It's called inflammation. Generally speaking, with age, there's a growing inflammation in the body. It's particularly true in the brain. Okay, the microglia cells, okay, which are kind of repair cells, begin to break down and get inflamed with age. And suddenly your brain is inflammation. Well, inflammation is a degeneration. The whole idea of everything we're doing is we want to decrease inflammation, which increases with age. That kind of makes sense. So what are we doing? Well, besides fasting, which is really phenomenal for inflammation, really, really good for osteoporosis, we offer fasting retreats twice a year. The next one's in the Dominican Republic on June 1st, coming up, a 7-day fast, and that does really decrease the inflammation. So, short of that, what are we going to do about the inflammation? So, there are certain supplements that we can take to decrease the inflammation. One of them is resveratrol, okay, which when you get in most known in red wine and chocolate, okay. Quercetin, very strong antioxidant, very, very good for reducing inflammation and a variety of chronic disease. Inflammation is connected with most chronic diseases. Green tea, and 3-4 cups of green tea a day. You can also get it as an extract. Has epigallocatechin gallate, which is very anti-inflammatory, and it's good for cancer too and so forth. But we're talking inflammation. That is a real problem with aging. I want to be really clear about that. So part of what we're doing with supplements is dealing with the inflammation part. Now, so the green tea, and then vitamin C, very important for inflammation. And there's a thing called apigen, and that's a flavonoid. And it's good. And then rutin, hesperin, they're part of the vitamin C complex. And there's a thing, I don't know how many people have heard of, but it's something I actually take, it's vinpocetine. And it particularly is working on the brain cells and the axons, okay, to reduce brain inflammation, vinpocetine, to reduce brain inflammation. You've got to have a working brain inflammation, you get memory loss, lack of clarity of mind, lack of concentration, lack of intellectual function. It's a big deal. Another one is luteolin. And it is good for inflammation of the brain. It's good for inflammation of the microglia cells. It's also good for your vision as well. It helps increase brain size. It helps boost memory, luteolin, okay? And then bromelain is very good anti-inflammatory. So we have to address inflammation. Now, of course, you want to not have highly excitatory junk food in your system. I mean, that's more common sense. But we have to be able to deal with that in a good way. And this is a simple way to do it with the foods, with the fasting. The vegan diet is less inflammatory, and animal-based diet is more inflammatory. So that's important. Okay. Now, there's a few more things that help with inflammation, but as we kind of move that way, I just want to say I'm going to move a little bit into, but folate, where are you, my folate and folic acid? But these things convert back and forth. I'm going to say folate. So what we're talking about, I mentioned the telomeres now. I mentioned inflammation. I'm mentioning, again, building muscle mass, which also has to do with dancing and balance, everything we're talking about. It's very straightforward. CoQ10, ubiquinol is also an important supplement with that. Now, the Omega-3s, EPA, DHEA, also feed into this, okay? They activate an enzyme called Telomerase. And what that does is it keeps your telomeres at more optimal length. And they can reverse even the shortened telomeres. And then vitamin K2 plays a role too. So basically, when people were given vitamin K2, they actually found that in animal studies that they live 7 years longer. Another important nutrient. Now, I want to just interrupt myself and kind of go back to orthomolecular psychiatry, which isn't a term used that much anymore, but really was how I got started, and that was in the early 70s. And that's when that whole field got started. And basically, it was balancing the brain neurotransmitters with supplementation. And the main supplementation was B3, B6, B12, and magnesium. Those are your four big players. And then also vitamin C was a player in that too. Now we know also vitamin D is a major player. So magnesium is important because it helps with the DNA replication, DNA repair, RNA synthesis, and it also increases telomere length. So magnesium is a big player in brain physiology. Now, along with that, there are certain polyphenols, which are super antioxidants in general. I mentioned resveratrol, and resveratrol also activates SIRTIN1, which gets the kind of growth hormone processes going. Also, a very good source of the polyphenols is cacao. It's very good for the brain and very good for the heart. I know people have, it does other things too, sexual activity and so forth, but it's brain and heart that we're talking about. And then I mentioned the green tea. Now, along with this is one other herb that I think comes up a lot is curcumin. Curcumin and turmeric are interrelated. They increase your anti-inflammatory and also the immune function. And vitamin A also plays a role. People suggest at least 10,000 to 25,000 of A. Now, vitamin B9 is known as folate. We got this folic acid folate going on, but there's a little bit of conversion, but the folate plays a role with this too. Now, those are kind of some of the players in the longevity department here. So now I've talked about a little bit with the muscle mass, with exercise and so forth, but we're also talking about keeping the genes working right. Optimum gene expression, optimum telomere length. So these are what are going on here. And so everything I mentioned to you helps with optimal gene expression. Particularly, I'm going to say vitamin D3 and resveratrol. The concept, again, just repeating this one more time, is to, at whatever age, you're living life effortlessly. Doesn't mean you get out of breath when you're dancing or you're doing push-ups. I mean, you're able to move fluidly through your life. You not have any physical impairments or energy impairments in your life. Okay? And I'll just make it clear, 50% of the people over 65 do have muscle loss. Now, I'm going to just add one more thing, is that the reason I talk about the push-up thing, and like this morning I did my 1,600 push-ups, okay? I do that on a regular basis, is we have to replace, we have to work harder. So at any age, we can get more flexible, we can get stronger, we can get clearer, but you also have to work harder. So if I'm not really doing this kind of work, 3-4 days later, I drop and how many push-ups I can do. That's my measure, okay, honestly. And so if I drop below that 1,600 mark, because I didn't do something for 3 days or 4 days, that is what we all face. We have to keep that effort up. We have to keep working, okay? You don't get to rest in that way, but you can get better, quicker, and stronger with age. So there's two pieces to that story, if that makes sense. So I want you to kind of keep that in mind. Now, I mentioned about Omega-3s. I'm just going to mention they do boost muscle mass. That's the EPA, DHEA. And vitamin D boosts bones and muscles. Okay, so we have all those things. Now, it's true for men, more true for men than women, but testosterone plays a role. Now that begins to drop, particularly after the age of 50, and as people are less healthy, even before that. So we need to do things to build that. And then women also need a certain amount of testosterone, and that builds muscle mass. It also helps build and protect the heart and the brain. So we want to kind of keep those in mind in this kind of bigger picture. Now, what I have noticed is one supplement called creatinine. It tends to be a very safe way to build muscle mass, but it also rehydrates muscle cells. So that's another thing to consider. And then the amino acid leucine. It seems to be helpful in decreasing catabolism, which is a medical word for muscle breakdown. Anabolism means muscle growth, just to get clear, and to help build muscles. So how do you keep your testosterone up? It's a really, really good question.